CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
And now, back to the man who puts the heart in shart. It's Tim Graham and Friends.
Welcome to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus. And in just a little bit, we're going to be joined by Matthew Fairburn. He covers the Sabres for The Athletic, and he's going to talk to us about his story that was months in the making. Ton of research, ton of interviews that he did. Headline on the story, Terry Pegula, Kevyn Adams, and the hamster wheel of the Sabres playoff drought. He gets into the Kevyn Adams origin story. How did this guy not only become general manager, but last as long as he has, longer than any other Sabres general manager under Terry Pegula, despite the least amount of success. But before we get to Matthew, who's covering the NHL Combine downtown, Jonah, a lot going on in sports, of course. I mean, we're in the finals for the NBA, Stanley Cup final in the NHL. Baseball's in full swing. The Bills are out at voluntary practices, which turn into mandatory practices next week out in Orchard Park. I guess real quick, we'll talk about all three. Not baseball. We're not going to talk baseball. So that would be four things. The three things. We'll talk NHL, NBA, Bills. What are your storylines for mandatory practices? OTAs, it's interesting. We were talking about it in the Bills media room just on Tuesday. These voluntary practices in 2025 are covered as much as the draft, as much as any, it was like Wednesday, which is the big media day during the regular season. It was like a week 3 Wednesday. I mean, the place was jam-packed. Every outlet has multiple reporters there. The Buffalo News had 4 reporters there. The Athletic had 2. The TV stations are sending multiples. I think it used to be OTAs, Mark Gaughan and Alan Wilson, or Mark Gaughan and Tim Graham, or they would alternate. All right, you want to cover? Heck no, I don't want to cover it. Now it's, I don't know. What's your take on that?
I'm with you. I don't think there is, I actually wrote a 4 storylines type story coming out of it, but it was a bit of a force. I don't think it's a big story development time of year. It's, the early off season, building the roster. There are things happening and there's intrigue, and the fans aren't able to watch these practices like we do. So I think there's some interest in what we're seeing.
They're not in pads. They're not hitting.
Yeah, you can overreact and you maybe tend to see what you want to see or force a storyline that you want to tell. It's a good time of year to tell off the field stories or quirky offbeat stories like you did with Frank Gore Jr. and his beautiful autograph. But yeah, I do remember a time when I first started covering Bills OTAs when it was really a lot of just get out there, smell the grass, and kind of get ready for the offseason and training camp. Mandatory minicamp, because it's mandatory, it seems like they take it a little more, not more seriously, but there's a little more of a real football practice element to it. It picks up a bit. But the different attendance and injury elements that happen throughout the spring are kind of notable, but there are stories that'll fool you. I remember last year, Chris Claiborne was doing pretty well in OTAs, and there was a lot of talk about what kind of role he would have on the Bills. And then by the time
Chase Claypool,
Chase Claiborne, I'm sorry, yes. Yes. And, so there's different things that you could see at this time of year that really aren't real storylines. Or I think there was not a fake storyline, but there was a belief going around after the first OTA that Keon Coleman has added all this muscle and looked like a new receiver. But those of us that were out there didn't really sense that. I think there was some photography tricks that went into that. So you can see things that aren't happening. You can see things that you want to see that maybe aren't as real as they should be. But those of us, what I think the value of this is Joe Buscaglia probably does this as well as anybody, but everybody does this to an extent, is being out there for all of the OTAs and all of the mini camps and going into training camp and then downloading all your notes and your thoughts and having a kind of an intimate knowledge of how the offseason progressed and who the Bills are going into training camp and then preseason and the season. It all fits together. It's almost like a television show where you don't know exactly what's going on in episode 1, 2, or 3, or you get a little bored in the middle of the season, but by the end, it all comes together and adds up.
Well, and to your point, one of the more interesting journalism decisions, I guess, or the media phenomenon coming out of Cleveland with the quarterback watch. And there was some reportage coming out of Brown's voluntary workouts about every quarterback's attempts and completions in 7-on-7 drills or whatever, and making it seem that Shedeur Sanders might be the guy. I mean, it was one practice, one snapshot. And then people who were at the Browns practice say it's clear that Shedeur Sanders is the fourth quarterback in terms of pecking order, maybe not in terms of talent, but in terms of the way the practice was rolled out. And who was working with whom. But if you do a snapshot, I mean, let's keep in mind, Shedeur Sanders is throwing against, other rookie defenders. He's not going up against the first team guy. Again, it's not even contact. There's no pass, all that stuff. Anyways.
Well, and also there are 3 OTA practices in every OTA week. We only get to watch one of them.
That's right.
So you might
it's dangerous.
Think you're picking up on some things, or you might just see a guy have a good day or a guy have a bad day or not do something and think that extrapolates to the whole off-season program, and that's not the case. They might be aware that we're watching certain practices and not show certain things or throw the media and the public off the scent of certain things in these open practices, open type practices. And the Bills are doing one less OTA week than they normally do, and I would presume than the rest of the league. So that kind of shows you that the Bills are de-emphasizing this portion of the offseason a little bit compared to how they have in the past, and maybe other teams at different points in their franchise are doing it.
Mandatory next week, which is, that was my, so we talked about how the voluntary workouts don't really matter as much. They only get slightly more significant when they're mandatory. And I think it's who's there and who's not. Of course, James Cook will be the player that we're looking for next week. Everybody else has been here. So James Cook, is he serious enough about this contract situation that he will miss mandatory workouts? I think that will be the first real statement from James Cook. The fact that he's not been here, you don't have to be. It's voluntary. He's the only one who's not, though, with the exception of Josh Allen this past week after his wedding. But yeah, I think that really that's where it becomes a little more intriguing, but still doesn't become a story for me. Well, I'll write about it next week if he's there, whether he's there or not. I will make note of it. And I have a story that I'm working on regarding James Cook and his contract situation for next week. But I think you shouldn't have to worry as a Bills fan until late July if he doesn't show up to training camp. Would you agree with that? Or do you think mandatory workouts are substantial enough that attendance will be meaningful?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the worry is already there that James Cook is displeased with his contract status and, a bit at odds with the Bills, or the Bills don't want to give him the contract that he wants. And that could be a discord that carries into the season. I think that's still the case, even if he shows up at mandatory minicamp. So I don't think it's a accelerated problem if he skips the mandatory minicamp, and I don't know if it's necessarily a resolved issue if he shows up to the mandatory minicamp, because he could do a hold in. Maybe he could skip one day and come for day 2. I don't think he's going to show up and say, yeah, I'm happy with this contract offer. Or, I mean, I guess this could happen, but I don't anticipate that the Bills are going to reach a contract agreement between now and the start of mandatory minicamp or announce it on the first day of
He's also
mandatory
not much
minicamp.
of a talker. So even if he shows up, I don't think we're going to get the big comment or the headline that says James Cook, pay me or trade me type thing. I mean, if he shows up, well, he probably might not, he probably won't say much, if anything.
Right. But I agree with also your point that as far as getting ready for the season and the Bills getting what they need out of their starting running back, that he doesn't need to be at these 3 practices next week for that to happen. That if his first day, remember, this doesn't happen anymore. Remember how the first round draft picks used to always hold out a bit through the offseason and early training camp and show up late. And that was a major source of hand wringing until they got there. And then it was all good. And I think even if James Cook skips the first day of training camp to make a statement, if he's there by the start of the preseason and the start of the season on the field during the season, it'll be okay.
And also, running back is a position, and we've talked about this on the podcast. It's a reactionary position. He knows the plays, same offensive coordinator, same running backs coach, same head coach, same teammate, same offensive line. All 5 of them are back. So a running back actually can probably afford to miss some time, probably more than any other position. And while I'm thinking about it, please, checking out Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK. Please subscribe. It really helps us out. Comment. We like the comments. We respond to the comments. We enjoy those. Like it, rate it, whatever you do on your platform of choice. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, all that good stuff. So thank you for your support. We have Matthew Fairburn coming up in a little bit, so we're going to talk a lot of hockey. So I don't know that we need to get into the Stanley Cup final right now, but I want to get your thoughts, Joan, on the NBA Finals. 2 smaller market teams. In fact, they are the combined smallest markets in NBA Finals history, Oklahoma City and Indianapolis. Where are you? Where is your interest level, and what are you most interested in with this matchup between the Thunder and the Pacers?
Well, the market size, I think, is an interesting conversation. And some people have had it as, this is something that the NBA doesn't want. The 2 smallest markets, national television ratings might not set records. But if you really follow the NBA, this is what the NBA has wanted for a few years now. Is with the CBAs, going back to previous CBAs, but especially this current one with luxury tax aprons, they've tried to discourage teams from building the super teams and having multiple max contract players, and trades like the Luka Doncic trade have been made as reaction to those luxury tax aprons and penalties that happen when you have too many players on giant contracts. And the Thunder and the Pacers are 2 teams in smaller, medium-sized markets that have, for the most part, built their teams through the draft and trades where they were giving away star players and getting back assets to in return. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's the MVP, the Thunder got back in that trade when they traded away Paul George. And you can go back through several trades, but Tyrese Halliburton, the best player on the Pacers, is on the Pacers because of a Paul George trade that they made initially to the Thunder, got back players that they ended up trading one of those to Sacramento for Tyrese Halliburton. And they're a team with 1 all-star point guard, another somewhat of an all-star player on each side, but not a collection of superstars. They're, real NBA teams. They don't have the highest payrolls in the league. And this is what the NBA wants. They want to show that any team can compete for a championship if managed properly, if you draft the right players, and that it isn't all the big markets and the superstars teaming up together. And I thought it would take a few more seasons for this CBA to have that effect on the league. But now we're seeing it here in these finals, when you could have had, the Knicks in it, or the Celtics are the defending champions and they had the best record in the East, and the Lakers were the number 3 seed in the West, and looked like a more formidable playoff team than they ended up being with Luka Doncic on the team. But that's not how the playoffs played out.
You have Tom Thibodeau now fired from the New York Knicks, and he was able to wring a lot out of that starting five, I guess. I was about to say the roster, but that's part of the indictment on Thibodeau and people who are surprised that he's let go. But really, a lot of the reason is he rode five guys really hard and didn't use the depth. And you were just talking about how the depth is kind of becoming king in the NBA and replacing those super teams. How do those stories mesh together? Are they totally separate? Meaning the Knicks may be seeing that we pay for 12 players, use 12 players. The rest of the NBA seems to be thriving with its depth. Even though we had success, we would like to be a team of deeper than 5 or 6 guys.
Well, the Knicks don't have a lot of depth, but they're not quite a super team. They were a collection of all these Villanova players, and they traded Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo for Karl-Anthony Towns. And they do have 2 all-stars, an all-star point guard and all-star center. And as these guys become eligible for contract extensions, they are going to have one of the highest payrolls if they keep this group together. Jalen Brunson took a smaller contract extension last offseason to help bring in a little bit more talent. So they're sort of a semi-super team in a way,
Okay.
or tried to be a little bit of a super team with this Mikal Bridges trade that they made. And, you know, the Knicks, I think, bring a lot of NBA culture cachet to the NBA Finals. And in Buffalo, I think there's some Knicks fans who are on MSG Network, and I think that contributes to that. And it would be a sexier, more interesting NBA Finals matchup. But if you watch the playoffs, especially that last season, the Pacers are probably a better team, better matchup, how fast they play, how well they shoot the ball. Oklahoma City's had the best record in the NBA, or one of the best records in the NBA all season long. And they're the favorite to beat the Pacers, but it seems like the Pacers, I think, can give them a better series here. And the Knicks, Tom Thibodeau, it's surprising that a team goes to the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Knicks haven't been in that position in 20-something years, and then firing their coach. But Tom Thibodeau in year 5, the way he coaches players, the way he coaches teams, his intensity, he's been fired before in similar situations. It's not surprising that this didn't work out all the way. And this is a team that was better in the first half of the regular season. The second half of the regular season did okay, did pretty well in the playoffs, but it did seem like his time coaching this team was reaching its expiration date sooner than later. I think maybe it was playing out to a point where, like, next year would have been the last year, and the Knicks just kind of, got ahead of that and said the personalities are starting to clash, and it's time for a new voice and a new coach to lead this team.
Yeah, I was looking for a little education there. You obviously know basketball way better than I do. But when you were talking about how the NBA is moving away from the super team, and hopefully it is the end of the era of the super team. I don't like super teams. I like an even playing field. I'm not particularly interested in Indianapolis or Oklahoma City, really. I mean, that just because, I don't know, I'm just not. But I like that anybody can make it. Like the Cleveland Cavaliers, for especially early on in the season, the idea, where did Cleveland come from? And the fact that that can happen in the NBA is encouraging, as opposed to Major League Baseball, where the Dodgers are just steamrolling everybody, even without, say, Mookie Betts in the lineup, or, Ohtani's not a pitcher anymore, and they can go shorthanded and still just steamroll everybody. I would like, though, I like the idea of the Knicks in the final only because same as my thoughts on the Toronto Maple Leafs making the Stanley Cup final. I just think it's fascinating. It's just riveting television to me. And it's not the same as the Yankees. It's not just New York. I mean, the Yankees win. The Knicks and the Maple Leafs haven't won in so long. So it's not like we're tired of seeing these guys. But I don't know. I would have liked the Knicks in the finals. I would have liked the Maple Leafs in the final. Just cause. But I don't like the Yankees in the final. It's not a big market thing. I think it's that these I guess the big market adds a little something to it, but these teams have their own gravitational pulls, and that just makes for better television.
Yeah, I think what the super team era of the NBA did was it made the regular season a lot less interesting in the earlier rounds of the playoffs, but it led to some super finals, those LeBron Cleveland teams against the Golden State Warriors, or LeBron and the Heat and Dwayne Wade against the Thunder with Kevin Durant, and the Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki, and the Spurs with the super team that they sort of had, even though they were built a little bit differently. And that's lacking here. As much as I think Oklahoma and Indiana are two very deserving teams of being in the finals and have all-star point guards, LeBron and Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and Luka Doncic and the real big stars of the NBA are not in the finals, which the NHL has with Connor McDavid. So I think the ideal is that it's a mix. Maybe you get a team like Oklahoma going against a team. This wouldn't happen because they're in the West, but a team that has LeBron or Durant or Stephen Curry on the other side. So you get a little bit of both. And I don't care about the size of the market, and I don't think the NBA really cares that much about the television ratings. The television networks maybe care, but I think the NBA likes the parity and getting the shine on all of their markets. But it would be nice to have a few more of the established stars in these finals, or in the conference finals. They were kind of missing from that too.
Yeah, household name players, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as tired as maybe hardcore basketball players or hardcore basketball fans would be that LeBron is in another final, it does really help the casual fan maybe want to tune into the game. Does what's happened in the finals, or I should say throughout the entire playoffs, how does that color the Luka Doncic trade? Now looking back on it, is Dallas still stupid?
Well, the Dallas
as
conversation
people
has
thought they
changed.
were. As people,
Well,
when it happened, it was like unbelievable. But now you see the Lakers didn't necessarily benefit from it.
I think from that perspective, that the Luka Doncic trade didn't really change the Lakers' fortunes, that they were missing a center and they traded away a center. As far as the Dallas side of it, I mean, the Dallas conversation changed when they won the lottery, and now they have Cooper Flag, but also Kyrie Irving's hurt and might not play at all next season, or will be back very late into next season. I was of the belief that the Luka Doncic trade from a basketball standpoint wasn't the worst trade ever. It wasn't a wise trade, especially when you factor in the age and the marketability and popularity of Luka Doncic, but that Anthony Davis is a great player on both ends of the floor and did make their defense better. And with a healthy Kyrie Irving, that can be a contending team, I think. And maybe now with Cooper Flag, and if Anthony Davis can stay healthy and some of the other players that they have, I don't think the Mavericks are going to bottom out and really regret that Luka trade as much as some people think they do. But it also is still possible the Lakers can add a big man and be a championship team next year. And if Mavericks fans see Luka win a ring with the Lakers, it will be something that, will hurt them a lot. And so that still has to play out. But I do think, yes, that the Lakers didn't advance very far in the playoffs. It didn't validate the Mavericks trade, but it took a little bit of that argument away that it was such a terrible trade and that they gifted the Lakers. What they gave the Lakers was a LeBron replacement and a superstar for the next era of the franchise that, the Lakers might not have been able to get without a gift trade like that.
Anything else going on around Western New York that you want to plug here, Jonah, since you're the man about town covering every event that there is for Channel 4?
Yeah, I'll note a couple things. A couple Western New York connections to the NBA Finals. David Mitchell, right, a former Niagara University player who played one season at Niagara, then was hoping to play another season. The Purple Eagles thought they could get him another year of eligibility, and the NCAA ruled that he had already used up his eligibility, was a graduate assistant coach for one season, and then moved on to being a video analyst with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and that's where he is now, and a chance to win a championship very early in his coaching career. And over on the Indiana side, they have Thomas Bryant, a backup center who's a Rochester native, who's already won one championship with the Denver Nuggets 2 years ago, was a big player off the bench in the Game 6 clinching win for the Pacers against the Knicks, and has an opportunity to win a second ring with a second club, and he's, Rochester native, if you count that as Western New York. Some people do, some people don't. So if you're looking for local Western New York rooting interests, they are there with both teams. And otherwise locally, I mean, with state playoffs, with all the different sports, regionals for baseball, softball, and the lacrosse, and the flag football, which is a newer sport in New York State, and in the second year of having state championships. And there's one Western New York team still playing, Pioneers, in the state semifinals on Friday, I believe, or it might be Saturday. But anyways, and then there's a state championship game on Sunday, and they have an opportunity to win a state title. It would be the first for a local Western New York flag football team. The Bills are very involved in promoting that sport, and they hosted the regionals last week. And then a Western New York native, Patchy Mix from Lakeshore, from Angola, Lakeshore High School, assistant wrestling coach at Sweet Home. At least at one point, I believe he still does that when he's in town, is making his UFC debut. He's been a champion in Bellator at 135 pounds and considered one of the best 135-pound fighters in the world, even though he's outside of UFC. And with Bellator being sold, that allowed him to join UFC, and he'll have his first Ultimate Fighting Championship fight on Saturday night.
What do we know? Is that a pay-per-view?
It is a pay-per-view. Some of the undercard is on ESPN. I do believe Patchy Mix's fight is on the pay-per-view portion, but I don't know that.
He was really plugged on one of the recent UFC telecasts as like the big news that he's joining UFC, and the way it was heralded, it seemed like, that they would want that on the pay-per-view aspect of it.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal in the UFC world and the MMA world. It's kind of acquisition or joining the new league and seeing if he's 20-1 in his career, and it was a very close decision for his only loss, and whether his dominance of the Bellator circuit will translate to UFC.
Well, maybe we'll have to find a place to go watch Patchy Mix. Are you available Saturday night, Jonah? You want to?
I might be.
I'll check in. Amherst Pizza and Ale House has those sometimes. They don't have them all the time. So if you're out there and you're thinking of a place to go watch it, check in with Amherst Pizza and Ale House. I just sent a text to the owner, John Bona, to see. We'll see if he gets back to me quick. But before we get to Matthew Fairburn,
I might be busy Friday night covering the Queen City Roller Derby's championship round.
And is that at Riverworks?
It is at Riverworks.
All right. Well, let's get to Matthew Fairburn. After we have this word from CTBK, we will talk to Matthew about Kevyn Adams and how this all happened when we come back.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.
And now, it's back to the man who's better at life than you are, you dumb fuck. It's Tim Graham and friends.
As promised, we're here with Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic. Longtime F. One of the original Fs. Former co-host of this show in a different iteration. Matthew, thanks for doing this. I know you're out at the Combine. You're at the Marriott at the Harbor Center. So thanks for carving out some time.
Yeah, I'm in this nice conference room that seems like would be a good place for important business. And so TGAF is important business. So I figured this would be a good spot.
Thanks, man. Hey, had to talk to you about this. I know you were working on it for a long time, and it dropped this week, your story on how Kevyn Adams came to be and how he has managed to last longer than any other Sabres general manager under Terry Pegula's ownership. The name of the article over at The Athletic is Terry Pegula, Kevyn Adams, and the hamster wheel of Sabres playoff drought. I guess, the most fascinating part of the article to me, and it's a long article and it gets into a lot of things. It's in depth and it examines a lot of facets. But I think, and you know this because we've talked about it, but I'm most interested in how Kevyn Adams cut the line and has managed to stay in that role for 5 years. And I know that that's probably a long answer, but how did this happen?
Yeah, it's sort of the central question I was trying to answer. I mean, in some cases, the origin story of Kevyn Adams 5 years into his tenure might seem like weird timing, but it's the number one question that I think people outside of Buffalo in the hockey world, whether that's people that work in media or hockey, are wondering about this team. Like toward the end of the season, a lot of people were like, oh, he's got to be getting fired, right? And it's like, well, it's a little more complicated than that. And then you realize you kind of do have to explain that to people, because I think in any other situation, and even if Terry Pegula had hired a general manager who he didn't have a previous relationship with, that person probably would have been fired by now. And this relationship does kind of explain not only how he got the job and why he's kept it for so long, but it does, to an extent, explain how the Sabres have gotten into this position under Terry Pegula's ownership and maybe some of the judgment errors that he's made over the years.
Well, the origin story gets stranger and stranger. That's why I think not everybody, you need to revisit the origin story too often, because it becomes clear over time. How did he get this job? Well, he's good at it, and then there's some successes and some evolution and development. But when it continues to be unsuccessful, it gets more and more peculiar. So you just like, so how does it happen? Then just becomes a real head scratcher, as opposed to the job answering the question itself.
I remember when I first took this job covering the Sabres, James Myrtle was our managing editor of NHL at the time, and he's since gone back to writing. So he's a senior, one of our national writers. But I remember one of the first things he said, and Myrtle, as you probably know, having met him a few times, like this guy's like an encyclopedia of the NHL and hockey. And so every guy, it's like he knows their playing story, right? And he said his big question was like, how did this guy, like he was just a fourth line player, right? So like, how did he become a GM? A lot of the GMs you see were like really, really good players. So if this guy wasn't that, like what was it? And what amazes me, and this isn't new, but like the idea that he got the job without a search or even consideration of any other candidates. Forget interviewing. There was no consideration. It was very clear that the decisions were made at the same time, right? Botterill gets fired, Adams gets the job. And the root of it really is the comfortability that Terry Pegula developed and Kim Pegula developed over time with Kevyn Adams in these different roles. And I felt badly that I knew as soon as I wrote the line about Larry Playfair that I was going to get tweets of like, oh, so Larry Playfair is the one to blame. And, Larry's like one of the all-time great guys. But he told, how Kevyn Adams met Lindy Ruff and got his initial job on that staff is he was at a Sabres alumni event, because Larry Playfair said, you're always welcome. You're a Buffalo guy.
Even though he'd never played for the Sabres,
right,
and technically is not in a Sabres alum.
Right. He's like, you're one of us. And he was not he really, and that's an interesting, sticky point of contention, I'm sure, for some of the alumni. But what he did have, was a Stanley Cup ring. And that's something that no Sabre alumni, anybody that's just a Sabre alumni doesn't have. And I think the Stanley Cup pedigree was somewhat impressive to Terry Pegula. He's big into development, the development of athletes, and that was sort of Kevin's role early on. He had this hybrid role in the where he was working afternoons with Darcy Regier and working mornings with Lindy Ruff. And that's when he started to cross paths with Terry Pagula a little bit and start to talk about the young players. And then Kevyn Adams becomes an assistant coach and he's traveling, and Terry Pagula is around a lot at this point, right? The Sabres are his sole focus. And they develop a relationship to the point where when Ron Ralston came in and fired Lindy's staff, Terry didn't want Kevyn to leave the organization. And that's when they created the job at the Academy of Hockey. And, one thing leads to another. He handles every job they give him. They start to think really highly of him. I mean, it was described to me as when he bought the Bills, it became sort of a Game of Thrones type environment where everybody wanted to be crowned the next Pagula and get close to Terry Pagula. And I mean, you covered PSE as well as anybody, the amount of turnover and change and turmoil within that organization. And I think Kevyn Adams, being a really nice guy, being just keeps his nose clean, right? He's, not getting into any sort of trouble. He's not ruffling feathers in a lot of ways. He's just doing his job.
Not acting like Tim Murray behind the scenes.
Not acting like Tim Murray, not acting like, any of these other like all these people I talked to, almost everybody qualified things
or
by
Russ
saying Kevin's
Brandon, or all the other people that have
on
been
and on and
fired.
on.
And that really, I think, and there's a parallel to, I mean, Russ Brandon being a common denominator here for, the Bills went through this, and it ushered in their drought also when Ralph Wilson made Tom Donahoe the president, and for the first time was not the president of his own team. Ralph Wilson entrusted Tom Donahoe to get the team over the hump to make them Super Bowl contenders again. And Tom Donahoe acted like a president would, or thought he should. And Ralph Wilson didn't like the decisions. He felt burned. And then what did he do? He fired Tom Donahoe and then retracted into his shell and surrounded himself not with necessarily the best football people, but the people he could most trust. And so that's where Russ Brandon comes to power and then gets increased. And then Ralph is an absentee owner as he becomes older, and Russ Brandon makes his hires. And I think that the Pagulas feeling burned by maybe the NHL pushing Jason Botterill on them, maybe feeling like, so yeah, I think that it comes down to, we just trust this guy and we don't care. And whether it's our son-in-law or our, deep business, business owner in a petroleum business, we're just going to surround ourselves with people we'd like being around.
Well, there was a quote in the process of researching this story when you had the Q&A with Kim Pagula when they fired all those PSE employees, and you asked her directly about the perception that preference is given to family and friends. And she said that they have come to learn that the quality of the person is more important than the experience, particularly if people aren't aligned with their values. And it wasn't weeks later that they put Kevyn Adams in as the GM. And so
Russ Brandon had been fired because of improprieties, and they felt burnt by him and some others. And yeah.
And if the pandemic doesn't happen, if the pandemic doesn't happen, Kevyn Adams doesn't get this job when he does. He's getting, he was being groomed for something high in the organization, and he was a vice president of business administration, which is a pretty big job and title. But he wasn't going to be on the timeline to be the general manager in 2020 if everything's normal in the world. But it was an opportunity to downsize, right size, as Kevyn Adams put it. And I think that's what struck me in talking to Kevyn Adams about that time and about like what the conversations were like or what the plan was. A lot of it was focused on right sizing the business. I think he was approaching it, and Terry Pagula was approaching it through a business lens. And the hockey plan was sort of being built on the fly. That was, we'll figure that out, but we got to right size this thing. I mean, he had no assistant general managers. He had
a lot of it had to do with right sizing all of the Pagula enterprises, including the restaurants and the bars and the boutique marketing firm and, you know, all these things that they wanted to be all encompassing. But the Bills didn't have to go through that right sizing. And of course, the NFL is a different entity altogether and is profitable. You roll out of bed and make money in the NFL. But it's interesting how the hockey team, I think, was being treated a little bit more like any of the other Pagula non-petroleum businesses, and not as a standalone major league sports operation.
Yeah, and somebody I spoke to mentioned, everything Sabres or everything Bills was always more important than everything Sabres. And that ever since he's bought the Bills, everything's been helter-skelter for the hockey team. And it's, you know, I thought that was an important perspective to include because I think the actions lead people to that conclusion also, right? I think it's a suspicion that Sabres fans have had is that because of the Bills, the Sabres don't get as much attention, whether that's financial, whether that's actual in-person attention from Terry Pagula. And something that has struck me is the sharing of the COO role or the president role ever since Ted Black got fired. And it's always a football person. It's always, it's Russ Brandon as president of the Sabres. He would tell you right now, if he were on this call, that he didn't know the first thing about the NHL, right? And he, of course, knew sports business and, had some MLB experience, but he was not a hockey guy. Ron Raccuia would probably tell you the same thing on this call, that hockey was not, something that was really a strength of his, to put it mildly. I mean, Pete Goelli is now in that job as COO, and his last job was with the New York Giants. Well qualified to be heading up the Bills and spearheading that stadium project and all of those things. But what about the Sabres and the situation that is somewhat dire with their attendance and their on ice results, this league record playoff drought? Like, did he have a firm grasp of exactly what he was walking into on that side of things? I have no doubt about his ability to handle getting events to the arena and doing things like that can help generate some revenue. But in terms of speaking some degree of truth to what is happening with the hockey operation, who is that person, if not just Kevyn Adams? It's Kevyn Adams and Terry Pagula. And now we're seeing, Jarmo Kekalainen is probably the most encouraging addition they've made because he can speak some of that truth. And from my understanding is the type of person to speak openly and bluntly and not, hide his opinions. And so if he's in those meetings and Terry Pagula hears some of that perspective, that's your hope as a Sabres fan, is that there's an outside voice giving Pagula a different perspective and maybe opening his eyes to what needs to happen.
How much? Well, I was about to give a little bit of my opinion in this question, so I'll retract that. How does Kevyn Adams stay in the job despite a lack of success? Is it as simple as just getting really close to making the playoffs a couple of years ago? Is that enough to tease Terry Pagula into keeping him around? I know, the floor is yours.
I mean, it's hard that the relationship, you can't separate that from it. Like, I wonder if he will get fired entirely ever. Does he just kind of get moved into a different role? I think to an extent there is a few things that are at play. One is that the personality type and the relationship means that Terry Pagula is heard. And that was important to him when Kevyn Adams took over. And in his previous situations with other general managers, he didn't always feel like he got, being on the
Ralph didn't feel like Tom Donahoe was listening to him.
Right. So like,
you can't tell me what to do. So I'm going to put in somebody who
gives you some control, right? And
experience be damned. This guy's going to listen to me.
If he's a proxy for ownership, and how much is it intertwined, right? Of Terry telling him to do certain things, or he can't, spending wise, there's an argument to be made. It's not an argument Sabres fans would want to hear, or it's certainly not the reality of the situation that they would like. But couldn't you make an argument that if when he took over, the plan was about right sizing the business, that he has done his job, how Terry Pagula hoped he might have, and that maybe if the hockey portion was second, like it'd be great to make the playoffs.
I would think
But
that
we
right
gotta,
sizing the business, especially in hockey, is making the playoffs because, as we know,
well, that would
traditionally you
help.
don't make money unless you make the playoffs. So it's hard to right size the business when you're not maximizing your revenues. And I
That's
also,
fair.
go back to when Terry Pagula bought the team. His main objective was to reverse what Tom Golisano had done in terms of limiting the scouting department, going to video scouting. There was a lot of cutbacks towards hockey operations. Terry Pagula was like, let's open the purse strings here. So at what point is, Terry Pagula needs to maybe look in the mirror regarding if he started giving too much. But I think that's where that Venn diagram of Pagula Sports and Entertainment businesses, from the record label to the vegetarian restaurant that Kelly and Jesse Pagula got to run, and the Sabres maybe bled over a little too much where I don't know. I guess that's more of a theory or more of a hypothesis than it is, I guess. But it just seems to me as though the Sabres were being treated like the healthy scratch or
Well,
the 716.
if you've been the only team that has left at least 6 million in unspent cap space for the last 5 years, if that's a hockey strategy from Kevyn Adams, then it's a really not a good one, because no team, and the cap has been flat for most of those years too. Teams that make the playoffs, they have like, some of them have like a few dollars of cap space. They're I'm always amazed. I'm, reading Myrtle's articles about the Leafs and the little things that they can do to create like $60,000 of cap space to fit X, Y, and Z, or that you got teams using long-term injured reserve to cram extra players onto their roster. How are you supposed to? So that's a question that it feels like we'll never get a straight answer to, in terms of, were you permitted in these years to spend? I look at that 91 point season, they had like 17 million in unspent cap space. It's got to be one of the best points per dollar spent coaching jobs we've seen in recent NHL history, right? That's a pretty good use of funds, pretty efficient. But if you're not spending the money, maybe there's something to Pagula as well to say like, well, I didn't surround Kevyn with more people in his front office, or I haven't, we haven't spent to the salary cap, so it's hard to properly judge Kevyn Adams. And here's the other thing. It could be just as simple as Kevyn Adams and Lindy Ruff have a year left on their contracts, and Terry Pagula does not want to pay people not to work. He's done a lot of that over his time as an owner. And I think, that's why I say Jarmo Kekalainen it's an encouraging hire, because for the first time, I see somebody in the front office that could take over in November or December if things are going poorly. A lot of people before would say, bump Kevyn upstairs and have Karmanos or Fortin do it. And I was just real averse to that idea, just because it's more of the same. And neither one of those guys seem particularly qualified to me. Karmanos probably more so, because he's got a pretty lengthy background, but still, these are guys that are in here already, that if they could have fixed it, probably could have had a hand in fixing it already. Kekalainen being an outside voice, an experienced general manager who did some good and some bad in Columbus, as anybody who's been fired obviously is going to have a mixed track record. But it's the first time where you can see a path to, if they want to reassign Kevyn Adams, even if things go well. I've said that, when I was talking with Chris Baker on our podcast, like if things go well, Kevyn Adams could also say, you know what, I'm sick of being the one that has to deal with reporters all the time and take all this heat for every little thing that goes wrong. I'll go up into this president job that frankly, his resume might make him more qualified to be in that oversight role than it is to build a roster. And now he's got a guy that could jump in there and handle all that. So even if things go well, I think if they make the playoffs, Jarmo Kekalainen will get more credit than any senior advisor in the history of the NHL. Like this guy will be seen. There's nothing Kevyn Adams, it seems like, can do or say to win people over, right? And now that Kekalainen's here, it'll be like, man, that guy, he saved the day. Like whether it's true or not, I can't imagine there's a lot of senior advisor searches that were as well followed as this one, right? It's people were looking for any little thing, any little outside help for Kevyn because another big question in this is why did it take 5 years to have that type of help? I mean, the Bills front office and coaching staff when Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane arrived was full of both rising stars and guys who had done it before, and maybe the front office more so even than the coaching staff. But I think of Leslie Frazier as sort of a guiding voice to Sean McDermott early on in his tenure. And it was kind of Kevyn Adams and Terry Pagula and Jeremiah Crow early on for the Sabres. And it was lean at the time. And they've slowly built it out. But the idea that they're still building it out 5 years later is just not in line with the reality of what the rest of the league is doing. And it's not in line with maximizing your chance to your point, get to the playoffs and make some money. Like a lot of profit left on the table when you don't make the playoffs.
Matt, what did you find in your research, or what do you think about Lindy Ruff's voice over the past year and how that's changed the dynamic of the front office and might still affect, or does that change now with a senior advisor? Because it sort of felt like Lindy Ruff was moonlighting as the senior advisor at times over the past year.
It definitely did. It was something I thought about when he got hired, that similar to this Kekalainen hire, it's like, okay, this is a voice that Terry Pagula will listen to, that he will trust. And you can see it in the behind the scenes videos that they post, him talking about culture over and over again, and it leading to a significant trade, like a piece that, trading Dylan Cousins is no small thing. So I think Terry Pagula has a lot of trust in Lindy Ruff. And that's what is, when you talk about this Kevyn Adams relationship and how decisions get made and how he sticks around, that trust, that comfort factor is so big that the fact that he hired Lindy Ruff, somebody with that cachet and somebody with that relationship with Pagula, was significant because I think it opens Terry Pagula's eyes. Now, everything I've heard about Lindy Ruff is he is the type of guy, like there was people that joked that Tim might remember, like when Tim was covering the team and they didn't always have like a captain or they were rotating captains. It's like the joke was that Lindy was the captain, right? Like, it's like, and he's the type of guy that a lot was made about his coaching staff, right? And that he didn't bring in, any real outside pieces for that coaching staff, but that he's the type of guy that really believes like I can fix it no matter what, and he was talking about that towards the end of the season. Like he always thinks he can fix things and he's not worried about casting blame anywhere else. And he probably feels similarly about Kevyn Adams, a guy that he first identified years ago as, a good candidate for his staff, to say like, we can make this work. I can make this work. I should be able to do this. Now, whether he still can at this stage in his career is a legitimate question, but I think his voice is a valuable one in the front office because of the fact that Terry Pagula will listen to him. I think that's the most important factor. If you're a Sabres fan trying to cling to hope, you want any outside voice that Pagula will listen to, because I just don't think, regardless of what you think of Kevyn Adams, his experience, the job that he's done, I just don't know if it's a great dynamic to have just those two kind of without these other experienced outside voices, people that will ruffle feathers a little bit and disagree and push back, and
somebody who will
really
challenge Kevyn Adams.
And that's what he didn't have, right? I think, and there was an element of protecting himself there, whether he was doing it consciously or subconsciously, of, not, that's one thing I've always respected about Brandon Beane, especially because Brandon Beane was not an area scout himself. He was not a former player. there's inferiority complexes that can come with that, right? Because you're not like those other guys in some ways, and you're not in the club, so to speak. But there's an incredible quality about Brandon Beane that he's able to lead all these people despite that fact. And he cut his teeth in his own way. Like, he was an assistant general manager and he went through, he was more than qualified for
He
his
worked in the
job. So it's a
mailroom
different,
or wherever. He's washing
right.
jock straps, that
It was
type
a
of.
different, um, much different situation than Adams. And obviously they searched for a general manager. They went through interviews and they landed on this guy. But his ability to have like a Dan Morgan in there, right? Like the ultimate badass middle linebacker, tough guy, who everybody in the league was like, this guy's going to be a GM. For him to say like, hell yeah, let's bring Dan Morgan in, like Joe Shane, Dennis Hickey, all
He
these
doesn't seem
guys, like,
easily threatened.
he's not at
A
all.
lot of
I
guys who
mean,
could take his job if things don't work out. Brian Gaine, Lake Dawson, who turned down the Dolphins GM job that Chris Greer got. I mean, yeah, Terrence Gray and Malik Boyd. I mean, the place is just replete with people who have their own opinions and smart opinions and are experienced. That's why it's totally different. Again, the way Kevyn Adams deals with his scouts or anybody in the front office is, I'm sure, well, I don't want to say I'm sure, it's probably different than the way he reacts to reporters. But we can see pretty easily how he reacts when he's challenged on something, even with a question from the media. He whines, he pouts, he seems like he has a pretty thin skin, and whether he doesn't or not, I don't know, but he sure seems like it. I mean, so Kevyn Adams just doesn't strike me as somebody who values being challenged. In fact, he's probably going to go the other way based on what we've seen publicly. So,
and some of that could be, in our conversation for this story, he was really standing his ground on his experience, right? And his path to the job. And to me, to some extent, that's expected, right? Of these high level, you're in these chairs, you got to have a confidence and a bravado to say, like, I went through it. But I look at it and I think perhaps the reason he draws that conclusion that he did sacrifice or that he did cut his teeth in the proper way or that everybody has a different path, it's easy to think that you sacrificed in the same way. But if you haven't been in, Medicine Hat in January or Moose Jaw in February, like, that's a tough job. Like, being a hockey scout and coming up as an assistant general manager and having to be the one there's a difference between being at U18s in Slovakia in August when everybody else is on family vacation and going to owners meetings or traveling around meeting with team presidents. Like, those are much different grinds. It's not to say that Kevyn Adams didn't miss time away with his family or didn't work hard in that role, but it is different. And so then when it comes to evaluating hockey talent and building a roster, and you're leaning a lot on your experience with the Carolina Hurricanes as a role player on a Stanley Cup team 20 years ago. And you would like to lean a lot on other people who are experienced that aren't there, right? You don't have anybody around you. And so that's when I think of, where some of that defensiveness comes from. There is an element that I don't know that you can recognize that struggle without having actually lived it. And it's outlined in the story, but in my research, there truly is not another general manager with his background. The closest is probably Mike Greer, who didn't have a ton of scouting experience. But again, this is a guy that is viewed as one of the all-time character guys in NHL history, and his dad was
father
an
was a
NFL
longtime
GM.
NFL general manager.
His
who worked-
brother
yeah,
is a GM. Yeah. Like, it's the family business, and also who knows if he's any good at it, right? Like, the Sharks are still
right.
in the early stages of it. So the other one is Kent Hughes, but he was a longtime agent, and they had a president of hockey ops above him. Like, they clearly, I'm all for outside the box thinking. I really am. But when you didn't even do a search, you have a hard time convincing me that you found the most qualified candidate. And that's, I think, that, and then, the fact that he fired a lot of people right after he took the job is a weird way to start.
His main
people are,
qualification was he's going to do what we say.
Exactly. And when your first order of business, when you've already taken an unusual path to the job, is to then fire people who are in the process of living that grind, that sends a message to the hockey world in a certain way. And you know how the hockey world is. It's an old boys club, and it's a small circle of I think that impacts, frankly, how things unfold sometimes, maybe when you're trying to build these relationships from scratch. And I think he still can get deals done. I don't think there's any sort of like vendetta that people hold, but it certainly makes people look a certain way, and it stacks the cards against you. And then the last 5 years, okay, so let's forget your resume before, because the last 5 years are now your resume, and it's not like a a lot has happened in the last 5 years that changes that opinion, which I think is part of the timing of the story for me. And so um, it was valuable and instructive in a sense, to have the experience of covering the Bills when Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott took over, and kind of understanding how Brandon Beane operated and built that out. Because you mentioned that there's a thin skin with Kevyn Adams, and covering Brandon Beane, I think there was an element of, I think that radio interview is a good example, right? Of, he's got some of that too, but the difference is it almost comes from I mean, it's coming from a place where they've won, right? So he can defend himself a little bit easier than Kevyn Adams, but it's coming from a place of kind of really wanting to stick up for what he's doing, and a strong conviction and belief and pushback, and not maybe an excuse making that tends to, that Kevyn Adams has leaned on a couple of times. And what he said in December wasn't false. And it wasn't dramatically different even than the radio interview Brandon Beane gave at the end of the year. Because there was stuff Brandon Beane said after the draft where I was like, I actually don't really agree with that. But like, he's saying it so strongly that the fan base is like, hell yeah. And they've won. So it goes to show you that the winning can fix pretty much anything. And Sabres haven't done a lot of that, so it's hard for Kevyn Adams to take that posture publicly.
One thing that's been forgotten, and maybe looking back, it was never really that true, but I think many of us believed it at the time, was when Kevyn Adams took over this job, there was some belief that Ralph Krueger had, like, the stronger voice in the front office, that he had that experience profile. And even when he was hired as coach, some people thought he maybe would have been better as a hockey president or a senior advisor, and that maybe his fingerprints were on pushing Bottrill out and he would have a lot more control. And it didn't play out that way. And he was, a bad coach in that second season, but he had the resume that Kevyn Adams kind of lacks. And it's just interesting how that seemed to be the case at the time, and how the Sabres have gone through these multiple phases in their playoff drought where there's different problems. It was the GM, it was the coach, it was the players, it was a lack of experience, it was a lack of fresh ideas. And it's just, no matter what mix they put out there, they can't seem to find the right solution.
Yeah, I think that's where the hamster wheel analogy felt really fitting here. It's like even the perception of progress leaves them in the exact same spot, right? When they get 91 points, or they're doing certain things that you think, okay, I remember when I took this job, this was the first event I covered, and I was here meeting a lot of people around the league, and, oh yeah, I just took over covering the Sabres. It's like, oh man, they're going to be something, right? They're coming. And yet here they are, they've gone backwards. They took a step forward and then took a couple steps back. And the Krueger point's a good one, because I think it speaks to the lack of, what's the analogy of, like, trying to build the airplane while you're flying type of thing. Like, there was a quote from Terry Pagula that almost made it in, that we ended up trimming for length, but him talking about the alignment they had with Krueger and Adams and ownership, and how they believe that was important for success. And we have that over in Orchard Park, and it's worked out pretty well. Kind of a cocksure statement, right? It's going pretty well for us over here, isn't it? And um, Krueger then, like, within the year, is fired, right? So it's like, this master plan within a year just completely falls apart. Like you're talking about signing Taylor Hall and potentially contending for a Stanley Cup. And less than a year later, you're tearing the whole thing down. The coach who helped attract Taylor Hall is gone. You're trading Taylor Hall for spare parts at the deadline. You're on an 18-game winless streak, and you're basically starting from scratch 1 year into the job. Like that speaks to the business coming first and hockey coming second. And hockey would be a learn on the fly type of thing. And um, I think the last 4 years in particular have shown the problem with that, the ups and downs of that. It's not that everything Kevyn Adams has done has been awful. You know, he's made some good moves, he's acquired some talent, but the overall plan and vision, I think, has been too reactionary and not proactive enough and built around too much faith in some of these young players and some of the players they've developed on their own instead of recognizing and sort of pouncing on situations ahead of time to, push your team forward in a bold and different direction. And
Well,
maybe
the
that's where
Athletic and the
Kekalainen can
Hockey
help.
News tell them every year for a long time that they have some of the best prospects in the entire NHL.
Not anymore. They're like fifth this year. They're like 15th. I
But
was
for
talking
years
to
and
Scott
years, it's
Wheeler.
like,
I
well,
was
here
like,
comes the
yeah.
youth movement.
Well, they
So-
pushed so many of them to the NHL that now they're middle of the pack. And you leave a lot of these guys in the AHL for a while, and it becomes, their value starts to diminish a little bit, and you wonder. The term Scott Wheeler uses that I like a lot is that, quadruple A players, right? Like those tweeners of like,
Right.
are they an AHLer or are
Jason
they an
Botterill,
NHLer?
Chris
Right?
Taylor.
How many of those do they have, right? How many of those, like, is Isak Rosen just a quadruple A player that you picked 14th overall? It happens. I mean, the NHL draft is a total crapshoot in a lot of ways, but um, same thing though with drafting. Like they've had some hits, they've had some misses. I think their development has been poor, and they've made some poor decisions with like Devin Levi, and probably handing out some contracts to guys like Power and Matthias Samuelsson before they should have. But um, there's been some hits there too, like JJ Peterka. So it's a matter of when you talk about the hamster wheel, is like every step forward, there's a step back in there too, and you end up in the same spot.
I know you
You
got to
mentioned
get
Paterka.
Oh.
Do you think they're going to get him signed, or how do you think that's going to play out?
Peterka, did you say?
Yeah,
I think that's going to be one of the stories of the league to follow in the next month, because it seems as if there's I mean, he's number one on some of these on Frank Saravalli's trade board, right? And so like stuff like that doesn't happen by accident. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because I don't know for sure, where it's going to land at this point. I think, they would like to have him. They view him as kind of this core piece and somebody that, they could build around. But if he's not willing to go long term for whatever reason, whether that's the vision of the team or he doesn't want to be here or whatever else, then they have a decision to make on. I don't think they should fear the offer sheet. That keeps getting thrown out there like, oh, they got to do something because he could get offer sheeted. I think the offer sheet would be like a gift to the Sabres. If the guy
That's
doesn't
the
want to be
market, yeah.
here and he signs an offer sheet, Kevyn Adams would be like, great. Like, thanks for doing this for me. The negotiating part, like, this is easy. All I got to do is match. Especially somebody can't go so outrageous that it would, what's somebody going to do? 7 by 10 would be
They're not up against the
crazy.
cap. I mean, that's one of the main faults of the Sabres is that they haven't
Right.
spent up to the cap, so they can handle an offer sheet. Probably
Yeah,
more than any other team in the league.
So I think actually Peterka would have to be pretty careful with that. It would have to be shorter term, recognizing the possibility that he could get stuck. And again, that's all assuming, which I don't know for sure, that, he doesn't want to be here. But if that becomes the case, like, I'm not opposed to the idea of them trading JJ Peterka personally. I think given
The
his
person
value,
who's probably most against that is the owner.
well, he very much is a fan of JJ Peterka, one of his favorites. So that's a wrinkle, right? That's a factor in all of this. But that probably doesn't matter much to JJ Peterka, right?
No, that's good news for JJ Peterka and his agent.
And the leverage
That's
that he
called
has,
leverage.
I think it'll be interesting. The reason I'm not against the idea of trading him is when you talk about like they would get a haul. The question is, would they get the type of haul in terms of
Taylor
stuff that could
Hall.
help them right now? Well, not that haul. They don't want that one.
That's
They tried that before.
That might be what they end up with, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but
That type of player.
You don't want to bring in draft picks necessarily because that's not going to help you win next year. And are you going to find that right trade partner that can help make you a better team from the deal? Can you get a couple of pieces that fill some needs and give up a little bit of scoring and take a chance that JJ Peterka doesn't become the next 90-point player in the league, that he kind of hovers around the 60, 70? You're taking a gamble there, but Lindy Ruff talked a lot about culture too, right? And changing the culture. And I think we all saw, and Peterka even admitted it, that his body language at times this year was not great. I mean, even when he's scoring goals, he's like not even celebrating some of the time. And so, that would change your mix in a meaningful way. But I only am open to the idea because I think it could get them a pretty significant haul. But yeah, I think it's going to be one of the most interesting stories to follow this summer, not just in Buffalo, but I think a lot of people around the league are kind of looking at him.
A couple of quick ones, and we'll let you get back to work. Who is the starting goalie next year? I don't mean opening day. I mean in terms of over the course of the season, who's the number one goalie?
I'd still put
is he in the system?
I'd put my money on Luukkonen still.
Who's the number two?
Does Kekalainen's presence help in that regard in any way? Do they have a relationship? The
that's
nationalism.
Kekalainen was involved in the Finnish team at the Four Nations, and Luukkonen was on that team, but he didn't play. And so I don't know exactly how Finland views him, but he did have a good, he had an amazing run in World Juniors with them years back. So he's, I think, in good standing with. That's a good question, actually. I think if I were a betting man, I'd be more inclined to bet on Luukkonen bouncing back with better defense in front of him than I would be on Devin Levi grabbing the job by the horns and running with it. It's an interesting question because I think they're still open to the idea of Levi playing in the AHL again. But what a risk. Wouldn't it be a big risk to go Luukkonen Levi going into next season? I mean, finding a veteran, a James Reimer type, but you have to find the right veteran because what if he has to end up in the AHL at some point? I don't think Reimer would have been super thrilled about going down to Rochester playing in the AHL for the first time in like 10 plus years. So it's a very tricky situation. I think Luukkonen has a good chance to bounce back, but it got rough at times last year. They need to play much better defensively, which is what Lindy Ruff was supposed to bring, and wasn't able to do. So that's a big one. That's a big wild card on this team, but I'd go Luukkonen right now.
And my last question for you, Matthew, I want to draw on your.
Well, can I ask you a question similarly?
Oh, yeah.
Who do you think is the number one center on opening night next year?
Josh Norris, I think. It could change. I mean, they could add somebody. They could.
He could get hurt again.
He could get hurt again. They could trade him. I mean, that's not totally outside the realm of possibility. I mean, the Canucks are always in the Josh Norris rumors because he's really good buddies with Quinn Hughes. So if the Elias Pettersson chatter picks back up, I wouldn't totally rule out flipping that asset, but they seem to have a vision that this guy could be their number one center. He's got to stay healthy. Big question is do you keep Kulik as your number two center? Are you comfortable with that? I think, again, pretty big risk. There's a lot of people that think there's the makings of a potential playoff team here, right? They're not viewed as completely hopeless around the NHL, but these questions you're asking, along with all the RFAs, it is a majorly delicate and complicated offseason, I think. And that is why it's such a risk, and part of why the timing of the Kevyn Adams story was what it was, because, man, you're keeping this guy now. In 12 months. If you decide otherwise, a lot of decisions will have been made that will have a major impact on the future of your team, from the goalie question to the center question, but really these RFAs are, and Alex Tuck is eligible to sign a contract extension on July 1, and that's a very delicate situation that you want to make sure you don't lose that guy.
Samuelson, the potential buyout possibility.
Yeah, I don't think that will happen, but it's possible. I mean, it's a good way to free up $4 million. I would think you might be able to get somebody to take it off your hands, but and they do still have some belief in him, but he's eaten up some space and he definitely, I mean, he went from Lindy Ruff looking at him as a guy that should wear a letter. And I think Lindy Ruff probably was kicking himself at some points during the season that he saw that, and I know why he saw it. And I know why they've liked Samuelson throughout his career here. But between the injuries and what happened in that New Jersey game and just the overall up and down nature of his play, the lack of assertiveness, there's some major questions with him.
He went from wearing a letter to wearing a scarlet letter.
That's right. He was not a popular man by the end of the season, and for good reason. I mean, I understand fans' frustration with him, a guy that size that's supposed to play that game that just hasn't brought it often enough. And the injuries aren't his fault, and I don't, blame him for that. But when he's on the ice, there's a certain snarl he's supposed to bring that it seems like it comes and goes too often.
But well liked by most of his teammates and most of us in the media and probably the organization. So the disdain Sabres fans have for him doesn't really cross that barrier within the walls, I don't think.
No, but I do wonder, that New Jersey thing, how that impacted sort of that lighthearted nature that he always brought to the locker room, right? Like it's harder to be the goofball when something as serious as that kind of has gotten hung on your shoulders. So big off season for him to look in the mirror and decide what type of NHL player he's going to be.
I wanted to draw on your history covering the National Football League and entirely within the AFC East as the Bills beat writer for The Athletic and previously at Syracuse.com. And then, of course, your turn as the Patriots beat writer for The Athletic. What is worse, the Sabres 14 years of not making the playoffs or the New York Jets 14 years of not making the playoffs, tied for the longest drought in North American sports? Which is more embarrassing?
I think the Sabres. Well, I think the Sabres is worse. I think the Jets might be more embarrassing just because it's New York and it's the NFL, and they have done it in spectacularly embarrassing ways.
In the National Hockey League, you can go off the radar because not as many people are paying attention as if,
and people feel
the
bad.
Yeah.
People around the league seem to feel bad in a lot of ways for the Sabres, for Sabres fans.
But it is easier to make the playoffs in hockey.
It is. I mean, it is. That's the part that makes it worse, but it's maybe less embarrassing because you can hide a little bit more. But like New York and the NFL and just the circus that they've been, right? Between the people that have come in and out of that organization, the way Woody Johnson carries himself. I mean, the whole thing is just a spectacular shit show. But this is worse. Like, it's a league record. Like, it just doesn't happen that teams miss the playoffs this long. And you would think, I mean, the way they botched Jack Eichel and Sam Reinhart and the tank and everything that's been mixed up in this mess, it's hard to do. It's hard to miss the playoffs this many times in a row. And now it's becoming hard to see like a direct path to it ending. I think that's one thing you can give the Jets a little bit of the benefit of the doubt is like, okay, the Patriots were kicking everybody's ass. And then the Bills came along and they got Josh Allen and now they're kicking everybody's ass. And you could argue that the Jets should have at some point figured it out and gotten their own Josh Allen. But, it is, I don't know which one will end first. Something tells me maybe the Jets because it's starting to become easier to make the playoffs in football too. But I don't know that I'd be betting on either of them.
No. If you had to make a bet on who gets in first,
I think the Jets. I don't know. Do we think the Jets have an even remote chance of doing it next year? Probably not, right?
I'd say the Sabres have a better chance of breaking it within the next year.
I think, yeah, the Sabres probably have a better chance next year. If it extends beyond that, then the Jets might have
I think the
a chance.
Patriots with their quarterback situation with Mike Vrabel, and maybe I've liked Mike Vrabel as a coach at Tennessee, so maybe I'm just, biased and feeling that he can be successful there. I feel like the Patriots have surpassed the Jets in the division and might even be better than the Dolphins.
And the Dolphins are still there, and the Bills aren't going anywhere. So
I don't know that the
they have
Jets
a
can
similar problem to the
survive the division.
Sabres in that their division is really tough, right? The Sabres division with Florida, Toronto, and Tampa, not to mention Boston and, Montreal, Ottawa, but like those three teams at the top have been, and they're Tampa and Toronto will take a step back at some point, but it might not be next year.
And if you go maybe a couple years down the line, I think the NFL is going to go to 8 playoff teams at some point. And even though the NHL should probably consider doing an NBA model with a play-in tournament, they seem very resistant to doing that, and that doesn't seem like it's happening anytime soon.
Yeah, and they didn't even make it in that bubble, I mean, that would have been the opportunity. It's kind of the unbelievable part of the whole thing is there should have been many
teams made it?
opportunities. It was at it was was it 20 or 24? I think it was 24. I think there was 8 teams that got left home, or 7 teams, whatever it was. I can't remember if they had expanded at that point, but kind of unbelievable to be in this spot. But who knows? Maybe 12 months from now we'll be talking about the playoff run that the Sabres went on. And
bonus question: who makes the playoffs first? Kevyn Adams or Jason Botterill?
ooh. Well, that implies that Kevyn Adams will make it at some point. He's got to do it this year. I don't like the spot Seattle's in. I'll put it that way. I don't love that roster,
Right.
and they've got some work ahead of them. They have much better chance next year. But if Kevyn Adams gets fired, then Bots has a chance to get him.
Well,
Did you make it to any Bandits games as a fan? Speaking of playoff games,
I didn't, but I did go to the U.S. I went to the Sled Hockey World Championships at the Harbor Center last weekend, which was a fun time. A good friend of mine growing up, his brother is one of the goalies for the sled hockey team, and it was he got to play the semifinal and the
he dropped. Well, we lost Matthew Fairburn. Let's see if he comes back. But I mean, that was a good story because a lot of people might assume like is that a friend? Would that be from Boston? That the goalie was was there a local?
I believe so. I mean, I think
from
Matthew
Buffalo?
had told me this. No. I think it was a friend from back home when we were in the press box. I don't know the details of it, but I do believe he said that before.
Well, he may have had a Wi-Fi issue. Well, our thanks.
Yeah, maybe the Sabres found out he was using their Wi-Fi after writing that story, and they nixed
Somebody
it.
stormed into the conference room there at the Marriott. Well, we'll give him a minute or two if he wants to come back in and say goodbye. But he was busy there. He was working. I'm sure he's got other things to do. So thanks to everybody for listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. Oh, here he's coming back. Matthew Fairburn dialing back in.
Looks a little different.
And he's muted. And there he is. Did you get booted or what happened?
Looks like he dropped the phone.
Now you're walking around. You're at the elevator.
My computer died.
Oh, geez. All right.
So now I'm on my phone.
Well, we can barely hear you now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Well, yeah, we can hear you, but you're kind of the quality isn't great. So we'll say goodbye, Matthew. Thank you for this. Get your shit done. Talk to general managers and agents and the draft picks and everything there at the combine. And hopefully we didn't tear you away from networking.
No, you're good. I always have time for my 2 biggest Fs.
Wait, one more question. How do we do with the half marathon?
Oh, so my goal, as you know, was 2 hours. I finished in 2 hours and 39 seconds. I just missed. It was It was a ton of fun. It was something I'll definitely do again. Really good event put on by all the people in Buffalo. A lot of fun people along the route cheering us on. So it was pretty good for my first time. I was pretty happy with it. I thought I was going to be able to dig deep and get there, but that last mile, it was I don't know. I ran by Key Bank Center, and then I seemed like I really slowed down on that last mile. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it.
So the Bills have 13 seconds and you have 39 seconds now. keeping you up to that.
Exactly.
Well, they say that you never make a bigger improvement than your first to your second on these long races. So you'll probably, come in at 155 or 148 the next time you do it.
That's my hope. It was an okay debut, and it was a lot of fun. It was a cool experience.
Well, thank you for this, Matthew, and hopefully we see you in person here very soon.
Great talking to you guys. Appreciate you having me.
All right, take care.